Greetings, everyone, and welcome to this 12th edition of Gather, ASU Care's monthly storytelling series held on the final Wednesday of every month. My name is Liz Warren. I'm the director of the Storytelling Institute at South Mountain Community College, and I'm tonight's guest host, and I'll also be sharing the final story of the night. We have a marvelous pair of storytellers this month telling their personal don't panic stories, Sister Navi Ho and Mandy Cheromiah. I'll finish the storytelling portion of the program with a traditional story in line with tonight's theme. As always, ASU Care is delighted to be sharing the space where the stories of our neighbors and friends from Arizona can be told. After the stories, we'll wrap up the evening with a conversation and Q&A featuring your questions. We hope you're inspired to encourage our storytellers with kind words, hearts, and applause, thoughtful questions, and more in the chat, because we always love to hear from you, the listeners. Now, first up tonight, we have Sister Navi Ho. Sister Navi Ho heard the calling to become a sister of perpetual indulgence 11 years ago and became a fully professed member of the Grand Canyon Sisters 10 years ago. She'll tell you more about what that means to be a sister of perpetual indulgence in her story. Navi Ho is currently in her second term as the abbess or president of the Grand Canyon House. She's collaborated with many community organizations and has continued to help our Valley youth and Native American communities by empowering and encouraging them to be themselves. Navi Ho, would you tell us our first story?
Yes, I would love to. Hello, everybody. I'm Sister Navi Ho, like she said. I'm from the Grand Canyon Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence. I'm the current abbess. Just give you a little bit background of what the Sisters are. The Sisters are a nonprofit organization that started in 1979 in San Francisco. And it started with 4 guys who had nuns habits who decided to go out to the Castro and see what happened. And here we are today. I think it's over 40 years that we've been here. We're all over the United States, all over the world. And what we do is we share love and joy, and we expiate stigmatic guilt. We expiate the stigmatic guilt that society puts on you for being who you are. We want you to be wonderful. We want you to feel blessed, and we want you to also feel love. And so, yeah, that's a little bit about me. If you want to know more, you can go to the Grand Canyon Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence website at www.azsisters.org. And it'll tell you everything and also give you some different links into the different sisteries around the world. So, with that being said, let me share. So tonight's topic was about panic. In being a part of the Sisters, we get put into many different situations within our communities, and we don't know exactly what's going to happen. And as a new nun growing up into the order, this might seem very shocking to many that I was very quiet. I was the typical Navajo boy from Phoenix, Arizona, who was the wallflower and just kind of just hung to the side while everybody else did whatever they could do. And when I found the sisters, looking into it and I'm seeing what it could be. And being I grew up here in Arizona. I grew up here in Phoenix. I'm Navajo. My mother is from uh, Tuba City, and my father is from um, White Cone, Arizona. So, and just being that just young person, I never knew this is what I would look like at 40. And so, but to go back to the topic of tonight, many of our sisters around the world, and we do joy ministry or just ministries to our community, whether it's performing, whether it's helping out, whether it's volunteering, whether it's anything like that. And a lot of us just like to go out to the community just to see who's out there and let them know that we're here for them. And if they need anything, they can come to us and we can help them out or, show them where to go to get help. And well, one night, it was just soon after I became a fully professed sister, still learning the ropes, not really understanding, like the whole concept of what I'm going to do. And we were at an event at one of the local bars here in Phoenix. And I decided to go up to the bar just to get a drink and get ready to just enjoy the night at the event. And I noticed this patron that was sitting by at the bar. And I just nonchalantly said, "Hi, how are you doing?" And he's like, "I'm doing, yeah." And I said, "Oh, okay. Is everything okay?" And he goes, "Yeah, no, everything's good." So I'm not like the person that's going to be like, "Hey, we got to do this and get who, all right." No, no, no. I was the quiet one. And so I was like, "All right, I'll, let him be," and stuff like that. And I decided to go on my way and go do what I needed to do. Later that evening, I went back to the bar and he was still sitting there and I told him hi again and he goes, "Can I ask you a couple questions?" And I said, "Yeah." And he, of course, asked what all this was and who we were and what we were and why we do what we do. And then so I sat down and I started to talk to him and he just started to just talk to me and just sit there and tell me pretty much what was going on in his life. And me being really not sure and quiet about things. And it was a shock. I totally panicked at that time because I was like, I don't know what I do. I'm not no psychologist. I'm not anything like this. What am I going to do with this person? In my mind, I automatically knew just sit with the person, sit with him and see what's going on. So that's what I ended up doing. We talked, and he was having a really bad night. He was having family issues, work issues, friends issues, and it just seemed to kind of just gravitate toward him, and he was just not having a really good night. And so I spent, I want to say, about an hour with him, just kind of just hanging out with him and just talking to him and asking him questions about his life and what's going on and stuff like that. And it, I was just very shocked on my part just because that's not my personality. That's not who I am. But that's what I've learned to just find the most fascinating things in the whole wide world about what I do is that I'm able to communicate on some sort of level with somebody. And during that time we talked and then the event was over, it was time to go home, and so I went on my way. About a week later, maybe 2 weeks later, we went back to that same establishment, that same bar, and it just so happened I see him again. And he recognized me. He came up to me and he told me, "Hey, can I tell you something?" And I go, "Yeah, sure." And he's like, "I want to let you know that that night I was really not feeling it. I was really just really down and really angry and really upset. And just talking to you and just having you just listen to what I have to say brought so much relief into me." And just to let you know that that night, I was contemplating suicide, and it was something that I was thinking that it's done, it's ended, I'm done with all this, I can't do this anymore. And I was just like shocked, like, what? And yeah, and he's like, but because we talked, because we discussed, and then of course I talked to other family too, it was just really nice. And to see that come out of just a simple hi, how are you doing? And it's just a blessing in it, in itself. And I still see him today, and I still say hi to him, and he's doing great. But it's those meaningful moments, or what we call sister moments, that happen throughout our whole time as being a sister, and even growing up as a nunling, and as a postulant and novice during our time. These things do happen, and these are, I find, the most gratifying examples that of just how we as humans can be very compassionate and very understanding to another person. And it was just a blessing. It was a very good blessing, and I'm so glad that he's still in my life, that we still say hi to each other, and he knows that he can come and talk to me. And since starting in 2010, I've had many different nights and many situations, and I find it just a wonderful thing, and it's a blessing.
Thank you so much for that story, Sister Naviho. I I have been very inspired by your story and the power of a question. And as I'll tell everyone later, it's directly linked to the story that I chose to tell. But I'm wondering, Sister, I know that the Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence is a very outward-facing organization. I know that you spend so much time in the community. What has the last year been like for you all when it hasn't been as possible to do that? How have you been reaching people?
It's been, I mean, just like anybody, it's been very difficult because our purpose is to be out in the community. Our purpose is to be with people. And so we had to really reconstruct the way we do things in order to be virtual, or in order to be safe, in order to follow the rules and the guidelines and stuff like that. But I have to say that we've done a wonderful job. Many sisters throughout the, I'll just talk about here. We've gone out to the community, but we masked up, we social distance, we followed the rules that exactly what needed to be done. We also had many things outside, like we did a walk for AIDS Walk back in February, and we just kind of walked up one of the streets and walked around, and that's kind of what we did. But we still were letting the community know that yes, during this time that there's a pandemic going on, we're still here for you, we're still around. And we do a lot of events, online as far as talking stuff. We do a talking circle that happens every month, and each month has its different different ideas, different topics, I guess. And it's just been a wonderful. One of the events that's coming up in May is we're going to be doing a "How are you doing?" Because now it's a year. We want to know how you've been doing. What have you been doing? What has been happening in your life? Because we want to do that connection with each other, and I think it's a wonderful thing. But it's been tough, though.
Yeah, I'm sure it has been, but I have to say, I'm not surprised to hear that the Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence figured out a way to keep doing their work. Thank you so much for that wonderful story and for getting us started tonight, Sister Naviho.
Yes, thank you.
All righty. Well, I am delighted to be able to introduce our next storyteller to you, Mandy Cheromiah. Mandy is from the village of Pawati, which is located on the Pueblo Laguna homelands in New Mexico. She's passionate about strengthening the collective and individual self-determination of Indigenous people through outreach, advocacy, and digital media. Amanda is currently a doctoral candidate in higher education at the University of Arizona, and her dissertation topic is exploring the identity of Indigenous students, faculty, and staff. She currently serves as the director for the University of Arizona's Native SOAR, a multi-generational mentoring program that serves Indigenous youth in Arizona. Amanda was recently named by the National Center for American Indian Economic Development 40 Under 40 Award. She has also earned educational scholarships from a number of organizations. And in her spare time, she's a photographer and loves traveling. Amanda, would you tell us your story?
Yes, thank you so much. Goati se hopa kautioista e shaska tena hanusta. Kuishisa au ba hopa shoba wishat ashtaneshia traba matsani. I just greeted you in our ancient language called Keris, and I'm so honored to be here with all of you today. So I contracted the COVID-19 virus in the most unexpected place, at home. In 2020, I traveled to 9 different states and took all the necessary safety precautions and did not contract COVID. I live with 4 other friends in a 4-bedroom house in beautiful Tucson, Arizona. One Saturday evening in mid-January, one of my roommates, Alicia, and I went to the movie theaters. This was the first time I'd seen a movie in over a year, and it was a little weird because it almost felt illegal because the theaters weren't open for months. But luckily, there was only 4 other people in this enormous Harkins theater. At the end of the film, Alicia and I got a text from one of our roommates. The text read, "I tested positive for COVID-19. Alicia and I both sank down in our black cushy theater chairs. I was scared, I was sad, I was mad, but I was mostly worried. I told myself, don't panic. Alicia said, I want to cry. My roommates and I mostly sat at the brown wooden kitchen table in silence while our roommate packed her stuff to quarantine at another place. I thought, how did a virus that was discovered thousands of miles away get into our house in beautiful Tucson, Arizona? After our roommate left, we put on our masks and deep cleaned the house. The fumes of the cleaning supplies were so strong. I should have kept my mask on in the days to follow. About a week later, I started feeling physically exhausted. I would look to the left, then I would look to the right, and I would look up, and I would look down. Every direction I looked, I felt pressure between my eyes. Soon after that, I took a COVID test at CVS down the street from my house. And in the midnight hour of January 28th, my COVID-19 results were posted on the CVS patient portal. Since June 2020, I've had over 12 COVID cases, and I was used to seeing the negative outcome. That didn't happen this time. I tested positive for COVID-19 a week before I was supposed to get my first vaccine shot. In that moment, there was no one to tell me, don't panic. Immediately after I saw the positive result, I started crying like a baby. I wanted comfort, I wanted the pain to dissipate, and I just wanted to feel better. Crying made everything in my body physically hurt, but even though crying pierced my head with this jolting pain, I also felt a release of pain. I was panicking, I was weak, and I was alone. Over the next 10 days, it seemed like the virus spread through my body, like the fluorescent green and pink colored wax that move in the 1990s lava lamp. It seemed to move slow and steady. Altogether, I slept and rested in my bed for about 9 days. There were many times I would wake up and my shirt would be drenched in cool sweat. Other nights before I slept, I needed about 4 fuzzy blankets to finally feel like I wasn't freezing. Most times I was too tired to think. I was too weak to panic. I could barely look at my phone or any electronics, and many times I was too weak to talk or text anyone, even my mom. I made her panic several times because she was anxious about the status of my health. In my place of despair, Alicia took care of me. She would bring me food and cold food medicine. I barely ate when I was sick, but ironically, I craved Lunchables, which were small servings of crackers and processed ham and American cheese. They tasted so good. And it's funny because I haven't had Lunchables since middle school, which was over 20 years ago. While I was sick, I had many dreams, mostly about food like gourmet pasta, foot-long corn dogs from the gas station, sour gummy worms, and tiramisu. I also dreamt about defending my dissertation at Old Main at the University of Arizona campus. In my dream, as large groups of people trickled into the meeting room, my heart began to race. My hands were sweaty and I started to panic because I did not prepare a presentation. And in my dream, I was sad because I wasn't dressed in my traditional Pueblo regalia. The three professors on my dissertation committee weren't even there. I was so disappointed that I worked on my dissertation for over a year, and I looked forward to the day where I could share my dissertation with the community I love so much. Sadly, the event was nothing how I imagined, but good thing this was only a dream. When I slept, it felt like my hair, which seemed to be as thick as horse's black tail, was choking me. It felt about 10 pounds. The weight of my hair hurt the back of my head so much that one day I couldn't handle the weight anymore. I told Alicia to meet me in the backyard. She braided my hair and she cut off my 17.5-inch ponytail with a pair of dull pink scissors. After my hair was cut, I felt a huge sense of relief. It was as if the pain and anguish fell away with my hair. I'd been growing my hair for about 5 years. There was a lot about why I cut my hair, but that's a different story for a different time. For a few days, I debated whether or not to publicly share about contracting COVID-19, and I'm so glad I did. I posted the photo of my 17.5-inch ponytail on Facebook that I contracted the virus. The love and support flooded in from near and far. Many family members and friends and colleagues and acquaintances blessed me with words of encouragement through text and social media and phone calls. My friends prayed for me, and my dissertation committee advisor flew in from South Africa and came to Arizona, and the next day she brought me groceries. Now, she didn't just fly from South Africa just for me, but it happened that way, where she cared so much and she came and brought me groceries. I felt greatly loved and blessed. I wasn't fighting the virus by myself. Dealing with COVID-19 is just as challenging mentally as it is physically. There were many times during the rough days I asked the Lord why I had the virus. After I passed my quarantine time and I was physically feeling better, I felt really depressed and lonely. One day, Alicia rescued me in my despair. We got a pedicure and a manicure. Having French tip nails really brightened my day. My nails today remind me of what I've overcome. Throughout this journey, I often thought about the old folks who contracted COVID-19 and folks who passed because of complications related to the virus. It's tough. Through my healing journey, I have learned that it's okay to not be okay. But the key is to not remain in that place of not being okay. Those who are listening now and have contracted the virus know that we survived a deadly disease. When you're feeling down or frustrated or have a sense of a slew of other emotions, remember that we are one of the survivors. We are still in a very strange time. When I reflect back on my healing journey, there has been this tension of panicking and not panicking and trying to process all that is happening in our world. But one day at a time, we heal individually, we heal within our families, we heal within our communities, and we heal as a nation. Thank you.
Mandy, thank you so much for that beautiful story. And thank you also for managing to work some humor into it as well, because I know I've spent the last year afraid that I was going to get it and hearing stories of others who had. And I can tell you it's a gift to be able to make us feel what you were experiencing, but also to make us laugh a little bit as well. I was so struck by you talking about having a dream about defending your dissertation. And I wondered if that dream and going through this whole experience has changed your feelings about what that defense will be like when you finally get there.
Yes, it definitely has, because when I'm writing my dissertation, I have like one more chapter left to go and I need to finish it in about a week. And
Wow.
So when I feel down, I'll text my friends and be like, hey, can you send me some words of encouragement? And my sister had texted me and she's the one that said, Mandy, remember you survived a deadly disease. And I had spent 3 weeks off of from work and school. And after those 3 weeks, I jumped right into my dissertation writing and I haven't stopped since. And so I have to pause and remember that okay, like I am feeling drained. I am feeling Zoom fatigued.
Yeah.
I am tired of sitting at my desk, right? Like all of that I have to remember and snap back into, like, we are in this very strange time. And I gotta give myself some room to breathe, to not be okay, but to also know though that it's important to have that balance, right? Like I have responsibilities, but I also really need to take care of myself. So I feel like I have a greater understanding of that. Right
Oh,
now.
I think that's amazing. So you're scheduled to graduate in May?
I am, yep.
So thereafter, we will be calling you Dr. Cheromiah.
Yeah, that's right, yep.
Oh, thank you for that, Mandy. Thank you much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for that story.
Thanks.
All right, everybody, to wrap up the storytelling portion of our program tonight, I'm going to be sharing a traditional story with you. And when I first heard the stories that Sister Navi Ho and Amanda planned to tell tonight, I immediately thought of one of my favorite stories. And it's a story that I've spent a lot of time with over the years. It's the story of the Grail from the Arthurian tradition. And it was first written down in the 11th century in France. But its roots extend much, much farther back into Celtic oral tradition. Now, the ideas of the Grail, something sacred and valuable and almost unattainable, and the hero's quest for it. Now, those ideas, Grail, quest, they're still present all around us in movies, memes, and cultural memories. But the deeper meaning of the story of the Grail is about the power of speech itself to bring about healing and to address cultural imbalances. When it was written down in the Middle Ages, the storytellers knew that the violent and toxic masculinity of that time had created a literal wasteland, and that the hero's job was to transcend that toxicity, to speak with courage and compassion. Now, I imagine that that might sound very familiar to most of you, since we are all still struggling with those issues over 900 years later. We still face those issues. When do we speak? How do we speak? How do we make that speech make a difference in the world? Well, now, it normally takes me over an hour to tell this story. So tonight, I'm just going to tell you a very abbreviated version of it. And it starts like this. It was the season when trees flower, when shrubs leaf out, when meadows go green, and all is aflame with joy. It was spring, just as it is now here for us in Arizona. Now, it was also the season of King Arthur, that glorious chivalric time, the time when many people think that maybe humanity was at its finest and most verdant as well. We certainly tell the stories about it in a way that would make you think that. But you know, in the midst of all that glory, there was a wasteland. And on the edge of that wasteland, there was a farm. And that farm was owned by a widow woman. But the name of King Arthur was never spoken on that farm. She had lost her husband and her two older sons to knightly pursuits. And she swore that her youngest son would never hear the name King Arthur. He would never hear of anything having to do with knights. Well, that worked out pretty well until he was about 18 years old. And he happened to meet a group of knights out on the road, and he was stunned by their beauty, by their might. And of course, he learned from them that very name, King Arthur. And he learned that King Arthur could make him a knight as well. And nothing his mother could say could dissuade him. He left the very next morning, making his way to King Arthur's court, asking every single person he met questions because he really didn't know anything about the world at all. And of course, he found his way to King Arthur's court. And when he met King Arthur, he believed, mistakenly, that Arthur had knighted him. And he went right out, and wouldn't you know, he won a marvelous suit of red armor and a magnificent red war horse from a knight who challenged him in battle. And when he got on that red war horse, well, that red war horse began to rule the day. It took him to the castle of another older knight who became his mentor and taught him everything he needed to know about being a knight. And when his time was done there, the red war horse took him to another castle where a lady was being besieged by many other knights. Well, he defeated all those knights and he sent them one by one off to King Arthur. And then he won that lady's heart. And she said to him, "Won't you please stay with me?" And he said, "I would love to stay with you. I would love to marry you. But my mother doesn't know anything that's happened. I need to go back and at least tell her everything that's happened. Then I will come back and we will get married." And he got on his red war horse, but the red war horse did not take him home. The red war horse took him into the wasteland, deeper and deeper, away from everything that he knew. And suddenly he found himself on a path that was getting narrower and narrower until his horse couldn't move at all. The path had become so narrow and so steep. Down below, he saw a dark, brown, murky river. And as he looked down, he saw a little boat floating along. And in that boat was a very richly dressed man. And that man spoke up and said, "Good day to you, sir. I see you're stuck there. Just force your horse on a little bit. The path will open up under his hooves. Come to my castle and please dine with me." And he floated on down the road. And the young knight, whose name, by the way, was Percival, he did just as the man had said. He urged his horse onward, and it happened. The path opened up. The horse took just a few more steps. There was the castle. And when he was led into the great hall, somehow his host was already there. And he was seated on a heavy couch filled with cushions, lots of people in there, and there was a great air of expectation, as if he had been expected. His host said, "Please come sit with me here. Forgive me for not rising to greet you, but my wound prevents it." Well, Percival was so curious. What was this wound? But he didn't ask, he just sat down. And no sooner had he sat down when a very strange procession entered that hall. There were pages with banners. There were beautiful young maidens with goblets of wine. But then came a knight holding a long white lance, and there was blood dripping from the tip of that lance. And after that strange thing came an even more wondrous sight. A beautiful otherworldly maiden entered, and she was carrying in her two hands a magnificent golden vessel like he'd never seen before, and her face was illuminated by that vessel. And she took it over to a table and set it down, and then everyone in that room was served from that vessel whatever they most wanted to eat or drink, including Percival. And he wanted to ask about it. He wanted to ask about every single thing, but he didn't, because the very last words his mentor had said to him were, "Don't ask so many questions. You have got to stop asking so many questions. Knights don't ask questions. Knights give answers. If you keep asking so many questions, well, it's unmanly. People will think you are unmanly." Well, Percival did not want to seem unmanly. So he didn't ask one of those questions. And by the end of the evening, that mood of expectation in the hall had changed to one of disappointment, even sorrow, Percival thought. His host, ever gracious, bid him good night, but Percival did not have a good night. He was restless and curious and confused, and he slept late. And when he woke up, the sun was high in the sky. And when he left his room, he was shocked to discover that the entire castle was empty. He was the only one there. What could he do? He got on that magnificent red war horse and rode away. Well, now, meanwhile, back at King Arthur's castle, King Arthur had been receiving night after night, besieging night, that Percival had sent to him. And Arthur said, "What is this? We only met that young man for a few moments, and now he's sending me night after night after night. We must find him." And so he decreed that the court would be moved into the countryside so that they might find this marvelous young man. And you know how these stories go. He was on kind of a magical red horse, and didn't that red horse take him directly to King Arthur in the countryside? And they were reunited. And they proceeded to have night after night after night of feasting and revelry. And Percival began to feel a little better about himself. He almost forgot all the strange things that had happened at the castle of that poor wounded king. Until the very last night of the feasting, the grandest feast of all, right into the middle of it, in walked a very unusual person. And everyone stopped to look at her. She was by far the oldest person Percival had ever seen. She seemed ancient, but she also seemed strong and noble. And despite the ravages of age and experience that were clearly etched into her face, he could see it had been a beautiful face. And in that face, he knew he was seeing the sorrow and the suffering of all the women he had ever known. Well, Percival didn't know who she was, but King Arthur did, and he greeted her. It was Kundry, the goddess of the land. And when Arthur greeted her, she turned to him and said, "I wish I could greet you, Arthur, but I cannot and I will not, as long as you have a person like that." And she pointed directly at Percival, "in your company." And everyone gasped. "Why is that?" said Arthur. "Why is that?" said Kundry. "Do you know who this is? Do you know where he's been? He was at the Grail Castle." That was the Grail, thought Percival. He saw the wounded king. He saw the lance that drips blood. He saw the Grail itself. And do you think he could ask a single question? Do you think he could open his mouth to ask a simple question, to say a simple word? No, no, he did not. And then she turned and spoke directly to Percival himself. "And you, do you know the consequences of your action?" Percival couldn't say a word. "I see you are as tongue-tied as you ever were," said Kundry. "Well, let me tell you the consequences of your action. This wasteland, it will continue to spread. Women will be widowed. Children will be orphaned. Many knights will die needlessly. This beautiful company here will be disbanded, never to be the same again. And all of this is because you could not speak." And she turned and walked away. Well, after a stunned moment, knight after knight declared that they would be the ones to complete this task. But Percival, he swore a different oath. He swore that he would never spend any 2 nights in the same place until he found his way back to that castle, to ask whatever that question was. And he stayed true to that oath. Was it months? Was it years that he fought his way through the landscape, never getting any closer to his goal? And one day he was on a path and he happened to meet a black knight on a black horse. And of course they fought. But oh, the consequences of this battle were very momentous. Percival killed the Black Knight, but his own horse, his beautiful red horse, was also killed. And now he had no choice but to get on that big black war horse and head on down the road, and that's what he did. He hadn't gone far at all when he met a company of people all dressed in white, and they looked up at him and said, "Sir, what are you doing in your armor on a day like this?" He said, "What day is it?" They said, "It is Good Friday. You should be seeking services. Just keep on going down this road. There's a holy hermit. He'll help you. He'll tell you what to do." And that's exactly what Percival did. Now, you know how these stories go. Of course, that old holy hermit turned out to be Percival's uncle. And he told him the answers to so many questions that Percival had. It also turned out that that wounded king at the Grail Castle was another of his uncle, and they were the brothers of his mother. And this is when his uncle, the hermit, gave him the saddest news of all. His mother had died in the years since Percival had been gone. Well, Percival poured out his whole heart, everything he'd been through, his failure at the Grail Castle, how he missed his beloved from so many years ago. But most of all, he wanted to know the answers to those questions. What was he supposed to ask when he got there? When he did find his way back there, what was he supposed to say? What was the question? But his uncle, the hermit, said, "I don't know. I can't know. It's not for me to know. When you find your way back there again, just trust your heart and let those questions come from your heart with courage and compassion." Well, despite his oath never to spend any 2 nights in the same place, Percival did spend a few days with his uncle resting. And when he hit the road again, he was a new man, a changed man. Yes, it was true. He never spent any 2 nights in the same place. But now, instead of fighting his way through the landscape, he sought to just move through it, to just be, and to be helpful when he could. And I like to think it was that black war horse that brought the difference for him, that brought that maturity and that change in perspective. And once again, did he spend months? Did he spend years? No one will ever know. But of course, it happened. After many years of journeying, he found himself again in the wasteland, deep in the wasteland, on a path that got narrower and narrower. And in his heart, it sparked a little memory. Was he back? And yes, that path got so narrow he couldn't move. And he looked down and there was that murky brown river again. But instead of that wounded king, he looked down and there was Kundry in a little boat. He turned away and said, I know I don't have the right to speak to you. But she said, no, no, Percival, no. You have proven yourself through your deeds, through your changes in life. You have earned your right to come back. You know what to do. Urge your horse forward and I will meet you there. And that is exactly what he did. He urged that great black war horse forward. The path opened up. There was the castle. He rushed in, demanded to be taken to his uncle. He didn't even take off his armor. He raced into that great hall where he had first met that man. But now what greeted him was a pitiful sight. There was his uncle, laid out flat, barely breathing, skin almost translucent. He was barely alive. And Percival's heart broke. He rushed over, he picked up his uncle's head, and he said, Uncle, what is wrong? What ails thee? How can you be helped? What is the purpose of the Grail if not to aid in your healing? Question after question poured out of his broken, open heart. And as those questions came pouring out, the color came back into his uncle's face. They saw his chest rise as he took a deep breath, and then as if lifted by angels, he rose from that bed. The two of them went to the window and they watched as a tidal wave of green swept through that wasteland, and broken and dead trees broke into leaf, and that brown and murky river began to sparkle and flow again. And just at that moment, Percival realized that Kundry was standing next to him. And as the green cascaded through the land, wasn't she also transformed into the very Grail maiden herself? When Percival saw that, he fell to his knees. She helped him back up and she said, you have done your work. When you ask a healing question from the depths of your heart, that is all you are asked to do. That is what sparks the healing. When you do that, you honor me, you honor all women, you honor creation. And that is what you have done today. Well, now that the old Grail King was healed, he was free to die. And that's exactly what he did after his many years of suffering. Percival himself became the new Grail King. And of course, he was united with his beloved, and they lived there and did the best that they could for the world for many, many, many years. And you may wonder, what about King Arthur? Well, it was just as Kundry said, that company never came together again, just as it had been before. But in the spring, when the green starts to spread through the land, when the flowers bloom and the birds sing, it reminds us all of King Arthur, of Percival, and the story of the Grail. All right. So I think you can see why I wanted to tell that story. When I heard Naviho's story and Amanda's story with the themes of questions and healing and support from friends, I knew I wanted to tell the story of the Grail. But now if I can get back to my script here, I've got it right here. What I'd like to do is engage both Mandy and Sister Naviho in some questions. And of course, if you all have questions, please go ahead and put them in the chat and they'll be relayed to us. And I'll be sure to ask Mandy and Sister Navajo your questions as well. But while we're waiting for that to happen, Mandy or Sister Navajo, would you tell us how long you've been in storytelling and about your storytelling experiences so far? Mandy, do you want to start?
Sure, yeah. Well, I'd just like to acknowledge that I come from a long line of storytellers. Our Indigenous people have been sharing stories through the oral tradition since before the record of time. And so I acknowledge that and I realize that. I'd say that probably when I was in high school, when I was like 11th, 12th grade, like I gained a lot of confidence from one of my mentors. I went to school in Albuquerque, New Mexico, private school, and we'd have like small services, like our chaplain for our school would help me like do different things, like just share like Bible verses or other things. And that's when I really began to build up a lot of confidence as a storyteller in a very public space. And then when I went to college, this was like in 2004, like this iPhone wasn't invented yet, right? But like as technology evolved, when I got my first iPhone in 2009, that changed my life because that phone gave me the ability to capture narratives using like photos, right, or videos. And ever since then, I took off from there. But I think it's pretty interesting because I actually am partially blind in both eyes. So even though I share stories through digital media, a lot of times when I capture them through a camera or video, I don't know what I'm capturing. So it's kind of interesting. So I think that it's a blend of like trusting the digital devices that I have, but then also relying on just the innate ability to share a story without using anything. So that's a little bit about my journey.
Oh, that's fascinating. Thank you, Mandy. Sister Navajo, how about you? What's your history with storytelling?
Well, I don't know, because this is my first time being a part of this. I don't consider myself a storytime person. I really didn't like reading growing up. I rarely would be the one that was very quiet when a teacher would call to read the story or whatever. So, I mean, that's kind of who I was. But as I've evolved and got to talk to people and got to express who we are as sisters and tell the story on that, it has evolved into just something just wonderful. I mean, you hear people when they tell their different stories and stuff like that, and some part of that story, it may not be the whole thing, but a piece of it will hit that person in some way. And I think that's the most gratifying part about talking and telling stories and telling, things that have happened in their life, because somehow it could help them in that way, whatever they're doing or whatever they're going through. But as far as being a storyteller, the last time I did something similar like this was over at South Mountain Community College. And it was, they wanted to see me transform into Eddie to Sister Navajo. So I stood on stage, and as I was talking about my progression and what I'd been doing with the community and everything else, I was putting on makeup at the same time. So I guess it would be more visual. I'm a very more visual person when it comes to talking and telling stories and stuff like that.
Thank you. Well, I've been an active storyteller for about 25 years, but I also grew up in a family that shared stories. And I come from people in Ireland and Scotland and Wales who told stories for millennia as well. But for me, particularly, my grandmother was a great storyteller. And whenever we got together, every time we got together, we'd have a meal, and then my grandmother would tell us stories for 2 or 3 hours. And those stories really formed the beginning of my repertoire. I still tell some of those stories today. Another question that I have for both of you is, what was it like for you to work with this month's theme, Don't Panic? And how did you arrive at the story that you wanted to tell? Mandy, I'll start with you again.
Sure, yeah. So I was supposed to do this event a month ago, and then I had COVID. Ironically, that was exactly when I had COVID, one of the most horrible days of my life. And I was supposed to share a story, and it was actually a completely different story about my healing journey as an Indigenous person. And So after getting COVID, I'm like, gosh, I shared this post on social media, that story, but it was a different form of it. But I felt like that was what I wanted to share. And then I actually fit the theme into that story. I was like, how can I put like, don't panic in there? And I was like, well, there's a lot of times like there's this tension between about like, okay, panicking and like, don't panic. Like you get this news and you're like, oh my gosh, like my life can change. And you're like, wait, okay, I can't operate in this place of panic mode, right? Because I don't think clearly. I'm not in my sound mind when you're like just high strung, right? And so I think that I was really digging deep to see like what emotions and what feelings I had when I had COVID. And so that's when I tied in the words of like don't panic, or my mom was panicking. It was kind of that tension of like both, right? Because you have to have both. And so that's kind of how it evolved for me.
Yeah, that's cool. Thank you, Mandy. And Sister Naviho, how about you? How did you come upon the story you wanted to tell?
That story about meeting the person in the bar and everything that happened with him, it's a story I love telling. Even the new recruits and the new younglings that are coming up, it's one thing that I always share, that don't be surprised in what you come up with or what happens, because like we go out, we don't expect it's going to be wonderful and great, and it could be everything. And I've been in this organization so long that sometimes I just expect the unexpected is what it happens. But tonight's story has always hit hard, and it always reminds me, especially when I'm struggling with just being a sister and trying to, like what you were saying earlier, trying to figure out how to reconnect with our community when we're in lockdown. And it definitely takes me back to like, you know what, you got this, you can do this. And it just reconnects me in my ministry.
Thank you. Well, we're starting to get some questions from people. So Colleen has asked about our dress. And she says, in the theater, it is said dress plays an important part of storytelling. Did each of you make an artistic decision on your dress to tell your story? Would any of you like to address that? Go ahead, sister.
I'll do it. Just being as colorful as possible, and I knew that they said you needed to have a ring light, and I mean, just a white face in its sense is a statement in itself. But then also just adding my own creative details and what I normally do, and then just adding the veils, the dress, the jewelry. It just kind of all seemed to come together because I wasn't sure on the color. I wasn't sure on what to wear. Originally, it was going to be an Easter looking theme, and then I was just like, no, I don't want to do that. So a lot of like that whole psyche thing goes on when I'm trying to get ready. But it all works out in the end.
And how about you, Mandy?
Yeah, so this weekend I took my graduation photos, and this is one of the dresses that I wore. I got made for the graduation photo shoot, but this is one of the dresses that goes actually the first foundation in our traditional wear. And so I was like, my friend Karen made it from one of our villages in New Mexico, and so it's customized to me. I got the print in Hawaii, and then I got the ribbon and stuff from Alaska. So that's a very special story. And so it pops with this background. This is a fake background. I like to use it because it brings out the color, which is me and whatever I wear. So people ask me like, is that your living room? I'm like, no, I can afford this, so I just kind of use it as a kind of standard background.
And Naviho, how about your background? Did you choose your background for any particular reason?
It was just the quietest place in the house. That's all, in my bedroom. That was originally I was going to put a green screen on and do all that, but it's like 90 degrees all day today, and I'm just like, I am not turning on my air conditioning just yet. So I was like, I need to stay cool and covered because I originally I have a blanket dress that I would wear, but it's too hot in here to wear that, and I was just like, okay, I need to wear something cotton. So that's but. Yeah, no, that's my background in my bedroom.
Yeah. Well, for me, I just like to wear simple things that are comfortable when I am telling. But I did wear these red earrings on purpose because the color red is so important in the story. the main colors in the story are white, red, and black, which are also the colors of the goddess. And so the red war horse and the red armor and all the red, I decided to wear red earrings specifically for that. And this is the background that I always have every day for all the work that I do. So thank you for that question. All right, we've got, thank you, Colleen, for that question. Chantel has a question for all of us, which is, what do you feel is an important component about your style of telling? Mandy, I'll go to you first. What are your thoughts about your style? Is it something that you've consciously constructed?
Yeah, it's interesting as a visually impaired person, when I speak in front of a group pre-COVID, I couldn't see the facial reactions of people. So I would go up there and really not have any kind of fear, because I know part of public speaking is seeing how people respond. And so I've learned over the years that when you're speaking in this public space, to slow down, to breathe, maybe to emphasize some words, right? Like, I mean, I was sitting here, and even with my nails, like some of that was impromptu. I was like, okay, I got my nails on. Like, you know, like use some of the nails in the story, right? Or even the part where it's like, look to the left and look to the right. Like, I want you to do that with me, you know? So it's like, I intentionally did those pauses so that it would engage you, like, oh, well, let me try that. How does my eyes feel? So yeah, I was very intentional about like maybe like the motions of like slow and steady, like a lava lamp, right? Like that's how you see the liquid in there.
Beautiful.
So yeah, I was very intentional.
That's a great metaphor. I'm going to remember that one. Slow and steady like a lava lamp. That's a perfect image. How about you, Sister Naviho? Something about your style that you've cultivated?
I think just being real in a sense, and not necessarily being like really by the book, and this is in my enunciations of words. I mean, I talk like I normally do every day. And if we were just chit chatting, and I would just, you know, I do a lot of hands too. I get that from my mother. But it's just more of just being that, hopefully making that connection with somebody. And sometimes it just seems like, you know what, they want to talk to somebody that's just like just a plain person, and not just be like, this is what you need to do, this is how you need to be. And it just seems that that's what comes off, especially dressed like this, definitely comes off as like, you know, that's not the same person. Like if you look at my boy self, the secular self, Eddie, we are two different people, definitely. He's more the quiet one, I'm more the outgoing one. And it's a weird combination in a sense, because I'm not that outgoing normally, but like this, I can just chit chat and talk to anybody. It just, as long as I have some jokes in there, and because I do get nervous too, and I feel that the joking is the one that kind of helps me out and gets me through my whatever I need to talk about.
Yeah, thank you. Well, for my own style, when we were telling stories in person, I tend to be a very physical storyteller. My body moves a lot. And I don't know that I've adapted particularly well to the little box. Sometimes I think, oh, you need to practice that and make sure that your gestures are all in the box. But even when I practice, I forget, because I'm like used to just taking up as much space as I want it to take up. But I agree with Eddie. I want to sound as much as like myself as I possibly can. And that's always my goal. We have another question here. This is a question for me. For me, Liz, what kinds of light bulbs go off for people when telling your story? And Tracy, I don't know. Tracy, send me another message. I'm not exactly sure what you mean. Do you mean in general, what kind of light bulbs go off for people when they're telling their stories, or what do I think happens for people when they hear my stories? I'm not sure. Okay, Tracy's giving me another message here now. What are some of the best things that have happened when you tell these stories? Any light bulbs go off for listeners? Well, I'll tell you a story that just popped into my head. And I used to tell a story. I like to tell cultural stories and traditional stories. And one of the stories that I like to tell is the story of Theseus and the Minotaur, that old Greek myth. And it's connected to the labyrinth. And I got very involved in trying to understand what that story was about. And I got especially interested in the character of the Minotaur, who had the body of a man and the head of a bull and was a monster. And but he was betrayed. It wasn't his fault that he was born that way. And he was isolated and rejected. And I thought, well, who wouldn't be a monster? So I wrote this whole long story about what happened to him and how he managed to redeem himself and become a man again. And after I told the story, a woman came up to me and she said, "You have just told the story of my son's struggle with addiction." And I hadn't thought of the metaphoric levels of the story. And the minute she said that to me, I realized that I had actually told the story of my brother and his struggles with addiction, and to figure out how to fit in the world. And that's one that sticks in my mind, but that often happens. Sometimes I'll tell a story and I'll be pretty sure I know what it means to me in the moment, but a listener will bring another perspective that takes that story even deeper. And that's one of the things I love most about telling stories. Claire has a question for Sister Navi Ho. And Sister Navi Ho, do you think more storytelling will be done by you and the Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence in the future as a healing activity?
Yeah, I hope so. I mean, it's wonderful to talk and let people know who we are and what, because sometimes they don't see us, or they don't know who we are, or they'll just see us walking down the street and they're like, look, what are those clowns doing, and stuff like that. And so it allows us to have that dialogue back and forth. But yes, I would love to be a part of it. And I know there was a lot more sisters in Arizona that would love to be a part of it too, because each one of us, like I said, like you said, I heard the calling, and that happened with any one of us. And each one of us has our own reasons why we joined the Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence. And the amazing stories that come out of it it's wonderful. And that question before, the light bulb, there's been many people that, as I tell my story, they became a sister. They became an advocate for the community and stuff like that. And it's just amazing. Just by simple talking, you'd be amazed on how many people get to get the light bulb, like you were saying.
Thank you. All right, so we're about to wrap up here, but Chris has a question for all of us, which is, where can we be heard telling stories next? Mandy, do you have more storytelling coming up in the near future that you'd like to tell us about?
My dissertation defense. That is in a couple weeks. I need to schedule the date. That's the biggest one. I'll be sharing my story there. I also share a lot of stories on TikTok. Man, those 15-second videos are powerful. How you share a story. So I just recently shared how we put on our moccasins, what the meaning of it is. And so I think TikTok is a very powerful medium that I've used to share with a lot of young people and communities how to prepare for college. So that's where I continually share stories.
Thank you, Mandy. How about you, Sister Navi Ho? Any storytelling coming up?
Like I said in my earlier, we do a talking circle every month, and each month has a different topic. And so we do a lot of talking circles, and you get to meet a lot of the other sisters in our group. But just like Mandy, I also do TikTok. Yes, it's the 15 seconds and 60 seconds is very hard to put a lot of information in, but it is very powerful. It's a very interesting tool to use to get out to the community, because sometimes people's, they don't have that span of 2 hours or stuff like that, or even 30 minutes. They just want something really quick, and boom, it's amazing how much information can be shared. I found out a lot of things. So yeah, TikTok is, Instagram, everything, pretty much social media here. So that's usually where I go and tell my stories.
Thank you, Sister Navi Ho. Chris, for me, I don't have any storytelling coming up in the very near future. As we're coming back into public more now, though, the Storytelling Institute will be producing more events in public and probably online as well. And if any of you would like to reach out to me to get on our mailing list or to know more about our upcoming storytelling events, please feel free to contact me at liz.warren@southmountaincc.edu, and I'll be happy to make sure you get notice of those upcoming events. Well, it's time for us to bring this this version of Gather to a close, I want to give a huge thanks to Mandy Cheromiah and Sister Navi Ho for their wonderful stories, and also for the chance to talk with both of you about storytelling and a little bit with our listeners as well. It's been a great pleasure to be the guest host and also to get to share a story. And before we close, I also want to thank Tracy Mason, Stacy Bailey, and Caitlin Booth, who are the producers of Gather at the Care Center and make all of this possible. Good night, everybody. Now, as we're wrapping up, and I think you're seeing some images on your screen, I do want to share with you some upcoming events. ASU Care's next live stream will be the 1-year anniversary of the Beams live music series on Thursday, April 8th at 7 p.m. Singer-songwriter AJ Odnell, who was the first ever Beams artist back when the venue had to pipe in artists remotely via Zoom, will be taking over the Beams stream and performing her jazz-inspired folk pop live from ASU Care. We hope you'll tune in from home or from wherever you may be. The next monthly Gather event will be Wednesday, April 28th at 6:30 p.m., always the last Wednesday of the month, and it's going to be another fabulous one. The theme is In Your Dreams. The guest host and cultural storyteller will be my colleague from the South Mountain Community College Storytelling Institute, Travis May, and he'll be joined by the crafty chica, Kathy Cano Murillo, and Sule Greg Wilson. Watch all these live stream events just as you're watching now on ASU Care's YouTube, Facebook Live, or Twitch. We recommend that you subscribe to ASU Care's YouTube channel so you'll never miss a show. ASU Care is a self-sustaining venue that has been presenting free, live-streamed arts and programming since April 2020, creating paid performance opportunities for Arizona artists during a time when we all need the lift and joy from music and the arts more than ever. The venue receives no funding from the state or university, has had no income for over a year, and needs support. If you are able to do so, we hope you'll stop by asucare.com on your way off your device tonight and click the gold Give Now button to donate any amount. Again, that's ASUCare, ASUKERR.com. You will be helping sustain the arts, artists, and the beautiful, historic ASU Care so the venue can bounce back from the pandemic and keep serving our communities with engaging arts programming in 2021 and beyond. Thanks again for watching, and good night.